Last week, we ended at verse 16.
上个星期我们停止在第16节，
And we saw how the sailors threw Jonah overboard into the sea.
在你们看到那些水手呢，将约拿抬起来抛在海中，
And then the sea stopped and became calm.
所以海风就停止了，就平息了。
And at that point in time, they all realized that Jehovah God is the true God of Jonah and the creation.
到那时候，那水手发现到耶和华才是真正的活的神，并且是约拿的神。
And so in verse 16, it says that they offered sacrifice to the Lord and made vows.
这里第16节说，他们向耶和华献祭，并且许愿。
And to make vows, it means that they actually sought to know God.
当他们许愿的时候呢，也是说他们在寻找上帝。
We continue from verse 17.
我们在第17节继续。
And at this point in time, as Jonah was thrown overboard, he was into the waves of an angry sea.
当约拿被抛在海中，他就在一个怒洪中的海中呢漂浮。
And you need to imagine yourself as Jonah in the sea.
所以你要想象一下，你就是约拿，你在海中，
And you are thinking that you will die in the sea.
而且你会想象到你正在要死，在海中死亡，
And that God is punishing you because he is chasing you down.
而且呢，你可能会想，上帝呢正在处罚你，
And there is no other option but to appease God and being thrown overboard to save the sailors.
因为当时呢没有任何的方法，唯一的方法就是把它抛下去，然后可以救了那些水手。
Now, Jonah did not imagine what is going to happen from verse 17 as well as in chapter 2.
约拿呢，其实他也不能够想象到将会发生什么事，尤其是在第17章和在第2节。
And now we see in verse 17, it says, and then.
这里说，第1章第17节说，然后，
it's not in the Chinese.
这里应该放个然后。
And so it says, the Lord designated a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah, and then, Jonah was in the stomach of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights.
耶和华安排一条大鱼吞了约拿，这边应该有个然后，他在呢鱼腹中3日3夜。
Now, first things first is that Jonah did not die.
所以第一件事就是约拿没有死。
And so God says, it says here, God designated.
这里说耶和华安排，
And this word actually means to, I think it means to appoint a fish, to tell a fish, or to prepare a fish.
这里呢，
or it means all of these.
这里这个安排呢，其实是说耶和华指定，或者是告诉，还有呢就是指示，预备了一条大鱼。
And this is how God has chosen an animal to take care of Jonah.
所以呢，耶和华安排了一只动物来照顾约拿。
And because it's in the sea, the only big animal would be a big fish.
因为呢，在海中呢，一个很大的生物应该是一条大鱼。
And this is designated as a great fish.
所以这边说是一条大鱼。
And how big a fish? It has to be very big to swallow Jonah.
这条鱼有多大呢？应该要大到能够吞下约拿。
And so I can actually imagine that it may look something like this, and that it has a big mouth. And Jonah was inside the belly of the fish.
所以你可以看一下啊，这条是一条很大的鱼，有一个很大的口，可以吞下约拿，约拿就在鱼腹中。
Now we need to understand that the idea of fish is not in our modern thinking.
好，这个鱼呢，并不是我们现在所想的那种鱼。
The Hebrew word for fish is dag.
希伯来文鱼就是 duck，
And it describes the waving of the tail.
它描述呢是尾巴会摇摆。
And so if you can imagine that in the sea there would be a big creature that has something that would resemble a tail, but big enough to swallow Jonah, and with a big stomach to allow Jonah to remain in there for 3 days and 3 nights, that will be the animal.
所以这应该是描述一个很大的生物在海中，也拥有一条尾巴，并且呢有个大口，它可以呢吞下约拿，使呢在约拿可以在腹中。
In Hebrew, the Hebrew words are very imagery and very descriptive of what you can actually see.
所以在希伯来文里边呢，他们呢很有那种描述性的词语。
And so fish would represent the tail wagging back and forth.
所以这个鱼的在希伯来文呢是表达那个摇摆的尾巴。
And then birds would be something that will have wings that fly.
而鸟呢，就是形容成有翅膀在飞翔。
So we call them birds, but they are actually flying creatures.
我们把它叫做鸟，其实呢，它们是飞行的动物生物。
And so you would find bats called flying animals.
所以你会发现到蝙蝠，也就是一种飞行的动物。
And that is how the Hebrew words describe animals.
那个就是希伯来文呢形容动物的方式。
So we find that it swallowed Jonah.
所以我们看到这条鱼呢吞了约拿。
And you need to have a big mouth to swallow a person.
它应该拥有一个很大的口来能够吞下一个人。
And then Jonah was in the stomach of the fish.
而且约拿呢在鱼的肚子里。
And this idea of the stomach of the fish really means the lower part of the fish.
而他讲的是鱼腹中，就是鱼的下腹部分。
And as you remember what I said about Hebrew words, they are very descriptive so that you can actually see and imagine.
所以这边讲到说希伯来文呢是很有描述性的，其实呢你可以想象到，可以看到。
And it's very similar to Chinese.
跟我们中文呢也是很相似。
And so when a fish swallows Jonah, you cannot imagine this to be like a modern day movie that you can see it going into the stomach.
所以你这边讲到说那条大鱼吞下约拿，不像我们在现代电影中看到的情景。
So you have to imagine that Jonah would have gone into the fish mouth, and somehow he lands into the biggest part and the most room in the fish.
所以你可以想象到，他就通过了他的口，抵达到这个最大的空间，就是在这个他的腹部。
Now, when we read something like this, we read it like a story.
当我们读的时候呢，就好像读了一个故事。
The Jews, on the other hand, would just sit down and have a lot of other questions.
可是犹太人呢，就坐下来，他们会有很多的问题。
So, what kind of questions do you think the Jews would have?
那么你认为这些犹太人会有什么问题呢？
They don't ask, what kind of fish is this?
他们不会问这是什么鱼。
Today, everybody is trying to guess, is this a whale? Is this a shark? Or is this whatever fish?
今天呢，读到这一段，很多人会问：这个是金鱼吗？这是鲨鱼吗？
And so, but the Jews don't ask that kind of questions.
但是犹太人不问这类的问题。
The Jews would ask that Jonah is in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the fish cannot eat.
犹太人会问的是说，约拿在鱼腹中3天3夜，所以呢，这条鱼不能吃。
Because if the fish is going to eat, the fish is going to digest Jonah.
所以呢，这鱼不能吃，要不然呢，它会把约拿消化掉。
And so the Jews will imagine, how is it that the fish doesn't eat?
所以犹太人就会想象说，这条鱼为什么不能吃都是食物？
And so they recall their journey in the wilderness after they left Egypt, that they were there and they had nothing to eat.
那么他们就回想说，古代的犹太人呢是在旷野中40年，他们也是没有东西吃。
And so what did God give the Israelites to eat?
当时耶和华给以色列人吃什么？
God gave the Israelites manna.
上帝给以色列人吃玛纳。
And manna is a heavenly food of some sort.
玛纳是来自上天的食物。
The reason why it is called manna or man has a very interesting idea.
为什么叫这个玛纳呢？
The actual word is man.
它本来的字眼是曼，
And in Hebrew, man means what?
在希伯来文曼是什么意思？
The meaning is what?
是什么？
And so they look at the whitish thing that is on the ground and they ask themselves, what is it?
曼的意思是什么？那么呢，当他们看到一个白色的东西在地上，他问说是什么？
And that is how manna, the name was given.
所以玛纳的那个名字来源就是如此。
And so the Jews would think that maybe God fed the fish with manna.
所以犹太人会想说，可能呢，上帝呢，让这个鱼喂它吃玛纳。
And as the people in the wilderness ate manna, the manna was not digested.
当在旷野中的以色列人吃玛纳的时候，是不被消化的。
It immediately gets absorbed into the body.
就是直接就被身体吸收了。
And so there is no digestion for manna.
所以呢，没有那个消化过程。
And so the Jews would think that maybe God fed the fish with manna. So for 3 days, the fish is actually eating but did not digest.
所以呢，以色列人是认为上帝给这条鱼呢是玛纳，就是它有吃，但是不需要消化。
Now you can see how the Jews think very differently from us today.
所以犹太人呢，跟我们现今的人的想法不一样。
And this idea of 3 days and 3 nights seems to be a constant repetition in the Bible.
所以这个3日3夜是在圣经中时常重复的。
And it's a very oriental thinking that 3 days is a long enough punishment.
所以这个也是我们的东方思维认为呢，3天3夜呢是一个很长的处罚。
And so with this, we will carry on into chapter 2.
来，我们继续到第2章。
In chapter 2, verse 1,
在约拿书第2章第1节，
we now find that Jonah is now responding to this.
所以我们看到呢，约拿呢向上帝反应。
The first word is then, and it's missing here. This is and then.
首先应该有一个然后，
And then it is after the fish swallowed Jonah.
然后约拿在鱼腹中。
And so let me redraw the picture for you here.
我们再看一下这张图。
Jonah started to pray to the Lord his God from the stomach of the fish.
约拿在鱼腹中祷告耶和华，他的神。
And the first thing that Jonah remembered was God, the Lord his God.
所以约拿首先第一件事记得就是他的神耶和华。
And we read from chapter 1 that Jehovah was the mighty creator God that the sailors now recognize.
我们在第1章就读到说，约拿他的耶和华上帝就是创造主，也让这个水手们认识了这个创造主。
And he is now praying from the belly of the fish.
现在呢，他在鱼腹中祷告。
And so this is the picture we have here. He's there praying to God.
所以你看到这个图像，他在鱼腹中，然后向神祷告。
Now, this idea of prayer is that the word pray is palao. It comes from the word palao.
好，这个字祷告在希伯来文中是巴劳，
And the base word literally means to judge.
它基本的字呢，其实就是审查。
And the idea of judging in this form of the word pray in Jonah chapter 2, verse 1 is to reflect the word palal on Jonah himself.
在这个字眼祷告也就是审查，其实呢就是约拿在那时候呢是自我审查。
And this is the idea of prayer in Hebrew.
这个呢就是在希伯来文中的祷告的意思。
That Jonah is reflecting upon himself why he is there in the belly of the fish, and why is it that he did not die?
所以呢，这个就是说，约拿呢，在他鱼腹中呢，在审查自己，为什么他不会死？为什么他会在这里？
And in that reflection, he is now directing his voice to God.
所以就在审查中，他就把他的声音求告上帝。
And so I hope that we all understand that prayer is not our modern day concept.
所以这个祷告呢，不是我们现在我们明白的祷告的概念。
It is for Jonah to reflect why he didn't die and he's still alive, and now he is looking to God.
这个呢，就是说，约拿是要自己审查，为什么他不会死？为什么他还会活着？所以呢，他就导向上帝。
Notice that he is in the belly of the fish, and he is not crying to God to save him.
你要注意一下，他是在鱼腹中他并不是在求上帝在救他。
And so now we read verse 2.
下面看第2节，
Verse 2 says, and he said, and this is Jonah speaking.
说就是约拿说，
And there is a word that's missing here, which is, and then he said.
然后说，
And this is not the prayer of Jonah.
这个并不是他祷告所说的话，
He has already reflected on himself, and that is the word pray.
他已经审查自己了。
And that's what in verse 1 called prayer.
所以在第一节中说的祷告，
But in verse 2, it is and then.
但是在第二节，然后
And he is speaking to God.
然后说就是然后向耶和华说，
And this is a conversation with God. You can say that.
这个应该可以是说跟耶和华的对话。
And what did he say?
他说什么？
He said, I call out of my distress to the Lord, and he answered me. I called for help from the depth of Sheol. You heard my voice.
然后说我遭遇患难，求告耶和华，你就应允我；从阴间的深处呼求，你就俯听我的声音。
Now, I call this an A and a B.
在这里，我们把它称为 A 的部分，还有 B，A 和 B。
And in Hebrew, when you have two statements, which is different, but it says about the same thing, it is an emphasis about the state of Jonah.
在这里，如果是两个句子，他们在讲述同样的事情的，其实呢，就是一个着重点，关于约拿的着重点。
And so you see the first phrase A is very similar to the phrase B, and it means the same thing.
所以呢，第一个句子 A 和第二个句子 B，其实他们讲述的是很相似的。
So if you understand this, it says that Jonah says, I call out loud in my distress to the Lord.
在这里说，我遭遇患难，求告。
And the idea of distress means something different from our modern understanding.
好，在这里这个字患难，跟我们现在的理解是不一样。
It means in a tight spot.
这个患难呢，其实这边是说，在一个有关生死紧要的关头。
And you find that Jonah is in the belly of the fish and he doesn't have room to move.
你发现到约拿其实他在一个鱼腹里，那么呢是动弹不得。
And that is distress.
那个就是一个紧要关头。
And distress means in Chinese is 患难, but it is actually in a place where you cannot move freely.
其实它真正意思呢，这个患难当时在这里呢是指说没有空间让你动弹。
And when Jonah said, I call out loud to God, he answered me or he replied me.
在这里说他求告耶和华，你就应许我。
And the idea of answer means God responded to him.
这里这个应允呢，表示说耶和华回应他了。
Now the second phrase, which we call B, says, I call, I call for help.
在这里 B 段呢是说我从阴间深处呼求。
Now what this means is that the word call is to shout for help.
在这里呼求呢，表示说大声求救。
And it is a different word from calling out loud.
从 不同啊，不同意思。
Yeah, it is different from
呼求
this word here, right? And now,
OK，
yeah. And so it says, I call for help from the depth of Sheol.
从这边说，从阴间的深处呼求。
Now, this word depth is actually belly. Here.
OK，从阴间的深处其实是指腹部。
Yeah, this part here. And basically the idea of Sheol is the Jewish understanding of either the grave or the afterlife.
好，
Or
这
the
个
yeah.
呢，这个需要呢，其实就是指就是人间的阴间啊，坟墓，或者是死后去的那个地府。
And the Chinese doesn't express it this way.
在中文里面并没有真正的表达出来。
It literally means that the Jonah is thinking that he is in a grave of some sort because he's supposed to die and he cannot move already.
给越南呢，其实他以为他已经是处于在坟墓里，因为他以为他死了，而且呢，动弹不得。
And so it is similar to this word distress.
所以呢，就是在这里呢，他说他的患难。
It is the same in a tight spot that he cannot move.
所以他在一个很紧要的地方不能够动弹。
Here it says that God answered me.
在这里说，上帝回应他。
Here it says, you heard my voice.
这里说，你听到我的声音。
And so you can see how it is an A and a B.
所以你看到句子 A 和句子 B，
And they are talking about the same thing.
他们都在讲述同样的东西。
Jonah is reflecting himself as if he was in the grave.
约拿正在自我反省，就好像他认为他在坟墓里。
And so when he was in the belly of the fish and he cannot move, it gives the idea and the image as if he was buried.
所以约拿在鱼腹中完全不能动弹，所以呢，给他一个印象是说他就是在坟墓里。
And that is why the Hebrew uses this word Sheol.
所以呢，为什么希伯来文用这个字就是阴间的深处？
And it is not reflected correctly in the Chinese.
那么在中文里面并没有好好的反映出来。
Verse 3.
第3节。
Now, when we look at verse 3, you find that we have some missing words.
来到第3节，你就发现到有一些遗漏的字。
It says, and then, and it's missing here.
在前面呢，应该要有然后。
Now, this whole picture in verse 3 is about the time when he was thrown into the sea.
而这个第3节所形容的地方，就是当他被抛下大海的时候。
And the idea here, when we read the English, it also does not reflect it in the English or Chinese.
不管是英文或是中文都没有真正的反映出来。
It says, for you threw me into the deep.
这里说你将我投入深渊。
And the idea here is, we think that God threw him into the deep.
这边是认为耶和华神你将我投下深渊。
Now, the idea of this word is a very different picture.
在这里讲投下，其实另外一个情景。
the meaning is that God caused him to be thrown.
在这里说，将我投下，是耶和华造成他被丢下、抛下。
And so it is not God suddenly lifting him up from the ship and throw him overboard.
所以并不是耶和华把他举起来，投下去大海。
We have to be very clear that this is not what the text says.
你要很清楚，这个并不是文中所要表达的。
We read in chapter 1, the sailors threw him overboard.
我们在第一章的时候有读到，是水手将他投下大海。
But the entire situation of the waves and the angry waves that is about to break the boat caused Jonah to be thrown overboard.
但是呢，是整个那些大浪使得那个船要弄翻了，所以呢，使得水手呢把他抛下大海。
And that is what verse 3 means for you caused me to be thrown into the deep.
所以这个章节是说，你造成我投下深渊。
It is not God throwing, but God caused the environment and situation that he was eventually thrown in by the sailors.
所以呢，是神造成整个情况、整个状况呢，使到他被投下。
Now, the word into the deep has a meaning.
在这里说，投下深渊，深渊。
And this idea here is the deep sea, right? Is the deep sea.
在这里是指呢，深海，深海。
And then it says into the heart of the seas.
然后他说就是海的深处。
And this is talking about the same thing, the deep and the heart of the seas.
所以他讲了深渊跟这个海的深处是一样的。
The next line, and basically it says that the sea is very deep.
所以他讲的是说一个深深的大海。
And he continues to say that the current flowed around me, all your breakers and waves passed over me.
接下来说，大水环绕我，你的波浪、洪涛都漫过我身。
And so you can actually see that this is in a rough sea, and Jonah was in the sea itself, trying to swim.
所以你可以看到，这是一个波涛汹涌的这个大海，而约拿呢，企图在海中漂浮。
And he is now describing that there is no way he is going to live and he's going to die in the sea.
所以呢，这边形容说他是没有办法能够在这里活下去不能够。
Now in this verse 4, it says, "So I said, I have been cast out of your sight. Nevertheless, I will look again toward your holy temple."
在第4节他说：“我说，我从你眼前虽被驱逐，我仍要仰望你的圣殿。”
This is his reflection while he is praying in the belly of the fish.
这个就是当他在鱼腹中祷告的时候，他的反思。
It says, "And then I said these words."
这边应该是说，然后我说。
And these words says this, that I have been cast out or driven, I would say, tossed away of your sight.
在这里说，我从你眼前虽被驱逐，就是被抛掉。
And this is the imagination that he's in the waves.
这个呢，就是在这个海浪中，
And it is as if that Jonah is saying that his life is going to end, and he is running away from God, and this is as far as he goes.
所以呢，约拿是说我逃避耶和华，这个就是结尾了。
This other word here is nevertheless.
这边说我仍要，
And basically it says uh, uh, as if instead of dying, there is now hope that I can see you again.
他的意思是说，虽然我要死
That
了，
I'm supposed to die, but now
yeah,
I can see you again.
就是说我可能要死了但是呢，我还是要仰望你。
And how can Jonah see God? Is that he is looking at the holy temple as the presence of God.
这边他怎样仰望上帝呢？就是说他看上帝的圣殿。
Now remember, when Jonah ran away and took a boat from Joppa and is trying to go far away, he was running away from the presence of God, understood as the temple of God.
所以当这个约拿呢逃避，而且上了一条船，在耶伯港口他呢就是要逃避耶和华。
So he says, now, as if I've been tossed away from your side, I can now see you again in your temple.
他是说，虽然呢我被抛离了你的面前，可是呢，他现在仍然要仰望他的圣殿。
And he could say that is because he did not die, he's in the belly of the fish.
因为现在他没有死，他在鱼腹中。
Now, we will cover one more verse in verse 5.
我们再继续看第5节。
Verse 5 says, Water encompassed me to the point of death. The deep flowed around me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head.
第5节说，珠水环绕我，几乎淹没我，深渊围住我，海草缠绕我的头。
This is a picture of how he saw himself being in the sea.
这个呢，就是约拿看到自己在海中的画面。
And he looks at himself that water has encompassed me to the point of death.
所以他看到自己呢，在水中被水环绕，而且呢，就是在死亡的关头。
I think this whole idea to the point of death has to do with me.
所以这个说，几乎淹没我，就是说我前面这个我字。
And the idea of me is talking about a Hebrew word, nephesh.
这个我呢，其实就是希伯来文的 nephesh。
And this word is generally reflecting of the very inner being of the person.
这个字呢，是指内心，
And it is nothing to do with death,
跟死亡没有关系。
right? It's nothing to do with death. It has to do with how the water is so overwhelming around me.
它是指说那个水怎样的围绕它，淹没着它。
And so the deep flowed around me.
而这个深渊围住他，
is the same as the water encompass me.
就跟珠水环绕我一样。
Now, the word deep here means the deep of the sea.
这个深呢，是指海的深处。
And this word is actually in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2.
好，这个字也出现在创世纪第1章第2节。
And it describes the sea as being very deep.
它也形容深深的大海，海的
Now,
深处。
now you find that this idea of seaweed was wrapped around my head is actually a good translation.
这里说的海草缠绕我的头，是一个很好的翻译。
And it is describing how far deep into the water that he has gone in.
这边可以想象到，可以形容到哦，他已经下到很深的深处，
That's why you have seaweed.
所以才会有海草。
And that is describing how deep in the sea he was.
所以这边可以形容出来，表达出他在海的深处。
All of this is describing his condition before the fish swallowed him.
这些都是在鱼还没有吞下他之前的情况。
And with this, I think we will take a pause so that we can continue next week for the remaining of chapter 2.
好，我们就暂停在这里。
And you can see that in chapter 2, it is not just a story, but it contains a lot of descriptive elements.
所以在这里呢，它并不只是一个故事，而是呢，其实有很多描述性的内容。
And so when we read the Bible, we must put ourselves into the shoes of Jonah.
所以当我们阅读圣经的时候呢，要把自己放入自己约拿的情况，
Then you can understand how he feels.
然后我们才能够明白和理解他的感觉是什
And
么。
then you understand what the Hebrew says about this entire event.
而且呢，你只要明白以希伯来文呢来理解这整个的事情。
So it is somewhat different from the English and the Chinese translation.
所以呢，就这个就是英文和中文的那些差别。
And with this, we come to the end of our session today.
今天我们到这边结束。